Well, ladies and gentlemen, come gather round, come gather round, come gather around. Today, we're looking at the two-edged sword of cooling, trying to have enough cooling on the highway and enough cooling in traffic, and you can't exactly have both, or can you? I've got a plan, let's go. So I've been driving this truck for a while, and it stays cool on the highway despite, okay, I've taken the radiator out of it. Okay, the rad is here, and then we've got the air conditioning condenser. And then we've got the transmission cooler, and then we've got an intercooler, and then down there is the transmission, no, that's the engine oil cooler. We got the power steering cooler, and there's another one somewhere. Nevertheless, in traffic, it's becoming a problem. We're in the heat of summer here in the Okanagan. It gets to about 38, 40 degrees in the summer. I had bought the biggest radiator you could get. It was rated at 700 horsepower, but it's probably not designed for all the stuff I have in front of it. And in traffic, it's not keeping up with hot temperature, especially if I have the air conditioning on inside. So here's what we got going on. So I bought this fan off of Amazon. It was like 90 bucks Canadian, rated at 130 watts, which in theory means it'll draw like 11 amps. Supposed to be, I don't know, I don't even know if it had a CFM rating or something, but it was fine until things were not fine, which it's not fine. So this, you got a couple things going on. You can put the fan right on the back of the radiator like that, and it probably won't cool effectively in traffic because you're really only cooling the surface area of the fan minus the hub. For $350 Canadian, I have a Spal fan, which came in a box labeled Be Cool. Be Cool is just a company that does radiators and cooling fans. This one's doesn't say a wattage, but it's rated to be 26 amps, which is like 2.5 times more effective than that in theory, or it's just not efficient. So I could just take this one off and put this one in its place, and it will cool, you know, just that area minus the hub. But maybe we can do it better. The other thing is the center of this is just proud, and if I bolt this onto the radiator, I'm going to be buying a new radiator, so this thing has to be raised up. Well, it's less effective if it's spaced off of the. Most of us are less effective when we're spaced. So we could put a shroud on here. Bam! So through the wonders of scrap metal I have lying around the backyard, I made a shroud. So this fan can now sit right there, like that. And now in traffic, this fan will draw from the entire surface of the radiator. So this should cool a whole lot better in traffic. However, on the highway, this may not cool as effectively because you got all of that airspeed trying to come through the radiator being blocked by shroud and trying to funnel it all through here. So you may run into overheating problems on the highway because it can't, I don't need a fan on the highway, but the air just plain can't get through this whole thing. So, I have a plan. I have a dream. And I have no idea where I put it. So I stopped at my local auto parts store and asked if there's like little rubber flappy door things that go on here. And I got, as I always do, the blank deer in the headlight stare because apparently my lips are moving but nobody understands what I'm saying. So what my idea is I'm going to put a bunch of holes in the shroud. And this is a bit of commercial vehicle inner tubing. I don't remember, I think I bought an inner tube for sealing a window or something. And if I put these in, I've drilled holes in the back. I cut a piece of inner tube that's 2 inch by 4 inch and drilled the holes one size bigger than 3/16. I might go one size larger. And the rivets here, these are just pop rivets holding them in place. The rivets are not popped all the way, okay? They're still kind of loose in there. So you can see they got the wiggle wiggles going on. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Yeah, animal print pants out of control, yo. A workout. My theory is that might give this just enough little flippity flop so that air coming in at speed can push this open and get out of the shroud, but when the fan is on, this thing should be sucked closed. This is how they work, and you see these on factory cars too. So we're going to see if that works. I don't know, proof of concept. let's Swiss cheese this beast. Well, that wasn't quite as effective as I wanted it to be. It cools down a little quicker, but we're still having issues. Let's look into that. Future me interrupting, or is it overheating? I'll get back to you on that. I'm not sure it is. So the intercooler in here, you got these pretty fat tubes running across it, and you're essentially kind of losing half of your airflow through the intercooler. So that's restricting the amount of air that's getting into the inside of it. Let's look at the rest. So this is a plate style transmission cooler, and because this is like you're losing half of the airflow because of the tubes in here, that's cutting down the amount of air that gets through this guy. And I don't think this actually flows a lot of air through it, which is blocking the amount of air that gets through this guy. With the shroud, the radiator is doing fine keeping the engine cool, but once I have the AC going and this is producing heat, I can't get the heat off of this because I can't get air through it because of these two. So my plan now is to get in here and remove the transmission cooler. I'll probably put it somewhere else. I may just bypass it. I'm still running a trans cooler through the radiator, but I'm gonna do something with this, and that should give me like an inch of air gap in here that is no longer hindered by this. So the shroud should be able to suck air through that thing. So we'll see. It's a pain to get out because it's one big cluster of blech. but I'm gonna try that. I may just try looping a hose between the two and bypass the thing just to see, but if it is successful, even if it's not successful, I'll probably put that somewhere else. So let's get into this one. Back from a little road trip, having removed the transmission cooler out of here to hopefully coax some more airflow into the cooling system, and it's better. At least I can drive around with the air conditioning on and the engine doesn't go over about 199, which is okay. I like it a little bit better, but whatever. Googling, it seems a lot of people who put on a front mount intercooler have cooling problems. When I'm pulling a trailer, it still gets hot, but I can still keep the AC on. It's not scary hot, but it does get kind of hot. We were at 217 degrees or so, at the highest we got to pulling a fully loaded trailer. Wow, 2,000 pound trailer. Okay, so I'm gonna try a couple things. One is I'm gonna try and seal up all the gaps between the front and the radiator. I've got a bunch of these like floor mat stuff that I've used for protecting my feet on a concrete floor that work great for seals and stuff. I'm gonna put that on here. Don't know if you can hear the backup beeper of the construction that's going next door, but it's always exciting. The other thing I'm gonna do is some water wetter, only it's not water wetter. This one is by Rizlone. They've been around since forever, and this does the same thing. I think it's called a surfactant. It mixes with the coolant and helps the water stick to the steel, the insides of the engine a whole lot better. So I went to Canadian Tire. They didn't have any water wetter, but they had this. So I'm gonna try it. We're gonna drain out some of the coolant that's in here. This is cold. You don't want to pop this off when it's steaming hot. And we're going to pull out some of the coolant there. This is 473 mil. This is 500 mil. So if I drain that, we should be good. Safety note, don't put non-drinkable products in a drinkable product container, except I'm going to be doing that. So there we go. So this is one of my many siphon hoses. And the secret with this is to have a small enough, this is actually how your exhaust system works, is it's not back pressure, but you need the siphoning action of the exhaust to help get the intake drawn in by the vacuum of the exiting exhaust. And if you have too big of an exhaust pipe, you're not going to have any of that siphon action. The proper term is scavenging. Don't care. If you ever tried to siphon anything with a hose that's too big, you know it doesn't work. So with this, we're just going to get this going. And the secret with sucking on a hose is to not get any in your mouth. Should be enough. So kind of below the camera here, I guess there, I don't know if you can see that, we are siphoning. It's got to be below the coolant level. When this guy fills up, we should be good. All right, so this is relatively new coolant. Siphon it back into that would be done. So this is relatively good coolant. So I'll probably put it in my jug of mix. Don't drink it. Actually, they've altered antifreeze. It's no longer as tasty as it used to be. I still have a jug of the tasty antifreeze that I give the students an option of tasting when we cover cooling systems. I warn them that it's poisonous, but as a mechanic, sometimes the best way to find out what that weird thing is that's leaking from your vehicle is to taste it. And it's tasting those wonderful chemicals that make me look so devilishly good looking. Okay, so I've pulled half a liter out of there. Or a pint for you American brethren. And then we'll dump this whole thing in and I hope it fits. Says it'll drop 17 degrees cooler in the rad, 41 degrees cooler in the cylinder heads. I'll see it when I believe it. So underneath, we have a bit of a gap between this kind of, I don't know what that is, duct thing that comes out of the grill support into the radiator. This radiator's been moved back 1.25 inches, and so now I've got an air gap. And so I'm going to try and seal this up. Goes all the way through. This is the oil cooler for the engine, just because that's where it fit. That's the power steering cooler, and the transmission cooler used to be above that. So I'm going to try and stick a piece of rubberized foam through here and seal up this gap as best I can. In hopes that air coming through doesn't try to bypass the rad, and so that any hot air from the fan doesn't find its way coming back around and drawn into here. I don't know, just try to focus it a bit better. I may also look at doing some kind of a shield to keep any of the hot air from coming out, or at least forcing the air coming through to go through the rad. I don't know, modern approaches to a vehicle like this. And I'm still leaking power steering fluid, which makes no sense to me. So to seal that up, I got some rubbery foam insulation for copper pipe in 2 different sizes. We'll see which one fits. I think this one's for 1/2 inch, that might be for 3/4. We'll see which one fits the gap nicely. Here we go. When you're building a car, consider some of the modern advances that the automotive world has done to make things better. You know, there's a reason why we improve things. So we started this video, it was overheating with the air conditioning on. I suspect because the heater on full would increase at least this much surface area with extra fan happening. I think there's an airflow issue going on. So I'm looking at why am I not getting enough airflow for the radiator. My first step was increasing airflow with a killer cooling fan and a better shroud to draw as much off of the rad as I can, and it was marginally better. But I'm still thinking an airflow issue. I took out the trans cooler, which is a plate style. They're supposed to be more efficient, but there's not really, it doesn't look like a high flow, airflow kind of cooler. So I've removed that, I'm just using the cooler in the rad. With the trans cooler out of the way, air can kind of get to the AC condenser and the radiator and hopefully through the fan. And it's certainly a lot better and more manageable but I'm still a little hesitant. Is air getting in here and then getting around the rad instead of going through? So I sealed up the top with some dense foam, and I put like a rubber foam pool noodle kind of thing on the bottom side. So anything coming into the grill area has to go through the rad. I still am going to go into here and do better seals around the intercooler tubing to seal off that and force everything through. But like on the highway, it's fine. So it might not be too bad. But Google University seems to be saying that, you know, running 200, 210 degrees isn't even overheating on this, which has gotten me thinking, because the temperature is definitely, you know, even with all of these changes, the temperature is running, you know, 195 on the highway at the coolest and getting up to 210, 212 if I'm sitting in traffic, even with all of this done. But the Google University seems to think that that's not actually overheating. Even 220 is still acceptable, which is a little sketchy. So it got me thinking, why is that acceptable for this? So I have a theory, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just a theory. In the old school traditional Chevy small block V8s, you got the engine block has coolant in it. You know, coolant's coming in through the water pump, circulates in the engine block, flows into the cylinder head, goes from there into the intake manifold to a thermostat. Thermostat opens, coolant goes to the top hose to the radiator, cools off, back into the engine, and it repeats. And the hottest part of everything should be the top of the motor, because heat rises, and that's the last place where the coolant's going to go. So if you have a 195 thermostat, that will open at 195, and the coolant will leave. And then cold stuff comes in the bottom, and it should slowly get hotter and hotter and hotter as it gets to the thermostat, and the thermostat maintains that 195 temperature. All that has changed on an LS. The LS still flows coolant in the same way, but they took the thermostat from the top rad hose on the intake manifold and instead put it on the inlet of the water pump. So it's closed when everything's cold, the engine block heats up, and once the engine block gets to the right temperature, that thermostat will open and let cold coolant into the engine block. And I imagine it would be a much more consistent coolant temperature, because as soon as cold stuff comes in, it's going to want to close that thermostat. But it'll heat up, so it'll open the thermostat, and there's going to be a delicate balance. It'll probably maintain 195 a bit better. However, the water pump is still pumping it through the block, still going into the cylinder heads, but it's not going into the intake manifold at this point. It goes back to the water pump. The water pump has double openings, and I didn't look at this when I put the motor together. I'm guessing 2 of those are going to be coolant into the block, and the other 2 are going to be coolant out of the block, specifically the cylinder heads. So with the thermostat down low on the inlet of the water pump, you get relatively cool, you get the cooler stuff coming into the block, and the temperature will go hotter and hotter from there. So it might be 195 and maintaining a consistent 195 at the block. But by the time that coolant gets into the cylinder heads and then has to come out of the engine, it might be hotter than 195. But we're not measuring. The thermostat isn't in the cylinder heads. It's not going from the block to the heads to an intake manifold. It's going from the block to the heads and then to the rad. And your temperature sensor for your gauge and for the PCM is in the heads. So the heads are probably going to read a higher temperature than the block is. So it may not actually be overheating per se. Now, a higher cylinder head temperature is good for burning the fuel and for combustion. Maybe not the best for power, but it's good for combustion and fuel economy and the environment. So that's not necessarily bad. And maybe a more consistent temperature in the block is better for oil and longevity of the motor. I don't know. There's a hypothesis here. Who knows? But this is kind of why I'm thinking that maybe when my gauge is reading 210, 215, 220, I shouldn't really worry about it. The cooling system may still be doing what it's doing. It might not be able to maintain 195 in the block when other parts are heating up downstream from the coolant. Don't know. The interweb seems to be chock full of people saying that, yeah, 210 is not bad, 215, even 220 is not technically overheating. So maybe I don't need to worry about it. or maybe I do. However, I'm going to try not to worry about it and see where we go from there. The last outing or two that I've done with this, we didn't really get over, I think 210 or 212. So that's probably not bad. However, we can't argue the fact that we improved the cooling system and the funneling of cold air direct to the cooling system, removed the restriction of the transcooler. I'm still running a transcooler in the bottom of the rad, so all is not lost. And I got a better fan and presumably more reasonable airflow. It definitely manages temperature better than it did before, and I think the transcooler was the biggest culprit, but it's better. Plus, I don't know, this might be a pretty significant heat source right here. Don't do this. This is dumb. But I ain't changing it because it's awesome. As always, thanks for watching. Take care. Stay in school. Don't do drugs. And we'll see you again.